The golden hues of the setting sun painted the bustling streets of New York City. Inside the luxurious restaurant La Belle, the air was filled with the soft hum of laughter, clinking glasses, and the aroma of gourmet dishes. The restaurant was a masterpiece of elegance, with crystal chandeliers and velvet drapes, a place where dreams and secrets intertwined. Among the waiters, one man stood out, not because of his appearance, but because of his hidden identity. Robert Sinclair, a billionaire with a vast empire, was dressed in a waiter's uniform. Tonight, he wasn't the powerful tycoon the world knew. He was on a mission to uncover the truth about his daughter Amelia's boyfriend, Jason. Amelia, Robert's only child, was the light of his life. She was kind, intelligent, and fiercely independent. But when she started dating Jason, a man from a modest background, Robert's protective instincts kicked in. Jason lived in a small apartment, worked a regular job, and had no ties to wealth or privilege. Amelia insisted that Jason loved her for who she was, not for her family's fortune. But Robert couldn't shake his doubts. Was Jason genuine, or was he hiding something? Determined to find out, Robert had arranged to go undercover as a waiter at La Belle, where Amelia and Jason were having dinner. The restaurant buzzed with life. Soft music from a live violinist filled the air, and the clinking of silverware created a symphony of elegance. Robert moved through the crowd, carrying a tray of drinks, his eyes scanning the room. Then he saw them, Amelia, radiant in a simple yet elegant dress, her laughter echoing like music. Across from her sat Jason, dressed in a clean blazer, his attention fully focused on her. Robert approached their table, his head slightly lowered. "Good evening," he said in a calm voice. "Would you like some wine?" Amelia, engrossed in her conversation with Jason about her upcoming art show, barely noticed him. But Jason looked up, his warm brown eyes meeting Robert's. "No, thank you. We're good," Jason replied politely. Robert nodded and stepped away, but his eyes remained fixed on the couple. For most of the evening, everything seemed normal. Amelia laughed freely, her joy infectious. Jason listened intently, his gestures kind and respectful. But Robert's skepticism lingered. He couldn't ignore the possibility that Jason might be hiding something that could hurt Amelia. As the night progressed, Robert noticed something unexpected. A group of loud, rowdy diners at a nearby table began making derogatory comments about Jason. Their words were laced with racism, targeting Jason's black heritage. Robert's heart sank as he watched Jason's face tighten. But Jason remained calm, refusing to engage. Instead, he focused on Amelia, shielding her from the ugliness around them. Robert felt a surge of anger. He had spent the evening doubting Jason, but now he saw the man's true character. Jason wasn't after the Sinclair fortune. He was a man of integrity, someone who loved Amelia deeply and handled adversity with grace. Unable to stand by any longer, Robert approached the offending table. In a firm, commanding voice, he said, "This is a place of respect. If you can't behave, you'll be asked to leave." The diners, recognizing Robert's authority despite his waiter's uniform, quickly fell silent. Amelia, noticing the commotion, turned to see her father standing tall, his true identity revealed. "Dad!" she gasped, her eyes wide with surprise. Jason looked equally shocked but remained composed. Robert walked back to their table, his heart heavy with regret. "Amelia, Jason, I owe you both an apology," he began. "I let my doubts cloud my judgment, but tonight I saw the truth. Jason, you're a good man, and I'm sorry for not trusting you sooner." Amelia's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "Dad, I knew you'd understand." Jason extended his hand to Robert, a gesture of respect and forgiveness. "Thank you, sir. I love Amelia, and I'll always protect her." Robert shook Jason's hand, a sense of relief washing over him. For the first time, he felt at peace, knowing his daughter was in good hands. The three of them sat together, the tension replaced by warmth and understanding. As the night ended, Robert realized that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in love, trust, and the courage to confront one's own biases. And in that moment, he knew Amelia's future was brighter than ever. The morning sun cast a soft glow over La Belle, the luxurious restaurant now quieter, with only a handful of early risers enjoying their coffee and pastries. The grandeur of the place felt muted in the daylight. The chandeliers dimmed and the velvet drapes drawn back to let in the sun. Robert Sinclair, still disguised as a waiter, moved through the space with purpose. His mind was racing, replaying the events of the previous night. Jason had returned to the table after the confrontation in the alley, his calm demeanor restored, but Robert couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his chest. The man in the black jacket, the whispered threats, and Jason's clenched fists. It all pointed to something darker, something dangerous. Robert needed answers, and he needed them now. He spotted Jason sitting alone at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The confident, charming man Amelia had fallen for seemed absent. Instead, Jason looked burdened, his shoulders slumped and his eyes distant. Robert grabbed a pot of coffee and approached the table, his heart pounding. "Good morning," Robert said, his voice steady as he poured coffee into Jason's cup. "Can I get you anything else?" Jason looked up, his brown eyes tired but polite. "No, thank you. I'm fine," he replied, his voice quiet. Robert hesitated, then decided to take a risk. "Rough night?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. Jason's eyes flickered with surprise, but he quickly masked it. "Just a lot on my mind," he said, forcing a small smile. Robert nodded, pretending to tidy the table. "You know, sometimes it helps to talk about it. Whatever it is, carrying it alone can be heavy." Jason studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust this stranger. Finally, he sighed. "It's complicated. Some things from my past. They're catching up to me. I just want to protect the people I care about." Robert's chest tightened. He wanted to press further, to demand answers, but he knew he had to tread carefully. "Sometimes the past has a way of finding us," he said carefully. "But running from it rarely works. Facing it head-on, that's the only way to truly move forward." Jason looked down at his coffee, his expression conflicted. "I wish it were that simple," he murmured. Before Robert could respond, the sound of a phone buzzing interrupted the moment. Jason pulled out his phone, his face paling as he read the message. He stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. "I have to go," he said, his voice tense. Robert watched as Jason hurried out of the restaurant, his heart racing. He needed to follow him, to find out what was going on. But as he turned to leave, he noticed something on the table. A small, folded piece of paper that had fallen from Jason's pocket. Robert picked it up and unfolded it carefully. The note was brief but chilling. "You can't protect her forever. Pay up, or she'll find out the truth." Robert's hands trembled as he read the words. This wasn't just about money. It was a threat, a warning. Whoever was after Jason wasn't just targeting him. They were targeting Amelia too. Determined to protect his daughter, Robert made a decision. He would confront Jason, not as a waiter, but as himself. He needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Jason froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face as he processed Robert's words. "You're her dad?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Robert nodded, his expression calm but firm. "Yes, and I went undercover to see what kind of man my daughter was dating. I needed to make sure she was safe." For a moment, Jason said nothing. He set his coffee cup down slowly, his hands trembling slightly. Then he leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I should have known," he muttered, more to himself than to Robert. "This whole time, I thought you were just a really observant waiter." Robert allowed himself a small smile. "I've been called worse." Jason let out a shaky laugh, but it quickly faded. His expression turned serious, his eyes meeting Robert's. "So, what now? Are you going to tell Amelia everything? About the loan sharks, the debt, all of it?" Robert studied him for a moment, his sharp mind weighing the situation. "That depends on you," he said finally. "I didn't expect to find a man who's trying to protect my daughter from his own problems, but I also can't ignore the fact that you're in danger. And by extension, so is Amelia." Jason's shoulders slumped, the weight of his struggles evident. "I never wanted her to get involved in this," he said quietly. "She's the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I don't want to lose her." Robert leaned forward, his tone softening. "Jason, I'm not here to judge you. I've made my share of mistakes, and I know what it's like to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. But you can't keep this from Amelia forever. She deserves to know the truth." Jason shook his head, his eyes filled with frustration. "And what happens when she finds out? That I'm not the guy she thinks I am? That I'm just some broke, indebted loser who can't even take care of himself, let alone her?" "You're not a loser," Robert said firmly. "You're a man who's been dealt a tough hand and is doing everything he can to make it right. That's not something to be ashamed of. But you can't do it alone." Jason looked up, his eyes searching Robert's face. "What are you saying?" Robert took a deep breath, his decision made. "I'm saying I want to help you. Not because I owe you anything, but because I see how much you care about Amelia. And because I believe you're a good man who's been caught in a bad situation." Jason's eyes widened in disbelief. "You want to help me?" Robert nodded. "I have the resources to pay off your debt and make sure these loan sharks never bother you again. But there's one condition." "What's that?" Jason asked, his voice cautious. "You have to be honest with Amelia," Robert said. "She deserves to know the truth, and she deserves to hear it from you. If you really love her, you'll trust her enough to let her decide what she wants." Jason sat in silence for a long moment, his mind racing. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. I've been so focused on protecting her that I didn't realize I was pushing her away. I'll tell her everything." Robert smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. "Good. And for what it's worth, I think she'll understand. Amelia's a smart, compassionate woman. She sees the best in people, even when they can't see it in themselves." Jason managed a small smile. "Thanks, Mr. Sinclair. I don't know how to repay you." "You already have," Robert said, "by loving my daughter and putting her first. That's all I ever wanted for her." As the two men sat in the quiet restaurant, the tension between them began to ease. For the first time, Robert felt a sense of hope. He had come here to uncover the truth, but in the process, he had found something unexpected. A man who, despite his flaws, was worthy of his daughter's love. But the story wasn't over yet. The loan sharks were still out there, and the danger they posed was far from gone. Robert knew they would have to act quickly to ensure Amelia's safety, and Jason's. Jason's heart pounded as Robert's car sped through the streets of New York. The city's skyline blurred past the windows, but Jason barely noticed. His mind was racing, torn between fear and hope. Robert's calm demeanor only added to the surrealness of the situation. Here he was, sitting in a billionaire's car, about to confront the very people he had been running from for years. "You can't just walk in there," Jason said, his voice tense. "These guys aren't like your business rivals. They don't play by any rules." Robert glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "Neither do I, when it comes to protecting my family." Jason swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edge of his seat. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this could go really bad." Robert's lips curved into a faint smile. "Trust me, Jason. I've dealt with worse." The car pulled up to a nondescript building in Queens, its exterior worn and unassuming. But Jason knew better. This was the kind of place where deals were made in whispers and debts were collected with threats. He felt a chill run down his spine as he stepped out of the car, his legs unsteady. Robert, on the other hand, moved with confidence. He adjusted his suit jacket and strode toward the entrance, Jason trailing behind him. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with the smell of cigarette smoke and stale beer. A few rough-looking men sat at a table, their eyes narrowing as Robert and Jason entered. One of the men, a burly figure with a scar running down his cheek, stood. "Up? Well," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "If it isn't Jason Mallister. Finally decided to pay up?" Jason opened his mouth to respond, but Robert stepped forward, cutting him off. "He's not here to pay," Robert said, his voice calm but commanding. "I am." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Robert. The man with the scar raised an eyebrow. "And who the hell are you?" "Robert Sinclair," Robert replied, his tone icy. "And I'm here to settle Jason's debt." The man chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "You think you can just waltz in here and throw money around? This isn't some fancy boardroom, old man." Robert didn't flinch. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook, scribbling something quickly, before tearing off the check and holding it out. "This should cover the principal and the interest. Consider the matter closed." The man took the check, his eyes widening as he read the amount. He looked up at Robert, his expression a mix of disbelief and suspicion. "You're serious. Deadly serious," Robert said, his gaze unwavering. "But let me make one thing clear. If any of you ever come near Jason or his family again, you'll regret it. I have the resources to make your lives very, very difficult." The room fell silent again, the weight of Robert's words sinking in. The man with the scar glanced at his companions, then back at Robert. Finally, he nodded. "Fine. Consider it done." Robert turned to Jason, his expression softening. "Let's go!" Jason followed him out of the building, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe what had just happened. Years of fear, of running and hiding, had been resolved in a matter of minutes. He looked at Robert, his voice trembling. I don't know how to thank you." Robert placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to. Just promise me." "One thing, anything," Jason said immediately. "Be honest with Amelia," Robert said. "She deserves to know the truth, and she deserves to hear it from you." Jason nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "I will. I'll tell her everything." As they drove back to the city, Jason felt a sense of relief he hadn't known in years. The weight of his debt, the constant fear of being found. It was all gone. But he knew the hardest part was still ahead. He had to face Amelia and tell her the truth. When they arrived at Amelia's apartment, Jason took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Amelia opened it, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Jason, I was just about to call you. Where have you been?" Jason glanced at Robert, who gave him an encouraging nod. Then he looked back at Amelia, his heart pounding. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Can we talk?" Amelia's smile faded, replaced by concern. "Of course. Come in." As Jason stepped inside, Robert stayed behind, watching from the doorway. He knew this was Jason's moment, and he had to face it alone. But for the first time, Robert felt confident that everything would be okay. He had done his part to protect his daughter, and now it was up to Jason to prove he was worthy of her love. The evening air was calm, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions that had swept through Amelia's apartment. Jason sat on the couch, his hands clasped tightly together, while Amelia sat beside him, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears. Robert stood by the doorway, his presence a quiet reassurance. The room was filled with a heavy silence, but it was a silence that carried the weight of truth and understanding. Amelia was the first to speak, her voice soft but steady. "Jason, I'm not mad that you were in trouble. I'm mad that you didn't trust me enough to tell me. We're supposed to be a team, remember?" Jason nodded, his eyes downcast. "I know. I was just scared. Scared that you'd see me differently. Scared that you'd think I wasn't good enough for you." Amelia reached out, taking his hand in hers. "You're more than enough, Jason. But you have to let me in. You can't carry everything on your own." Jason looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm sorry, Amelia. I should have told you sooner. I just didn't want to drag you into my mess." Amelia squeezed his hand. "Your mess is my mess. That's what being together means. We face things together, no matter how hard they are." Robert stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Jason, you've been given a second chance, not just with Amelia, but with your life. Don't waste it by keeping secrets. Trust is the foundation of any relationship. And if you want to build a future with my daughter, you need to start being honest with her and with yourself." Jason nodded, his expression resolute. "I will. I promise." Amelia smiled, a small but genuine smile that lit up her face. "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere." Robert watched the two of them, a sense of relief washing over him. He had done what he set out to do: protect his daughter and ensure she was with someone who truly cared for her. But he also knew that this was just the beginning. Jason's past might be behind him, but the future was still unwritten. As the night wore on, the tension in the room gradually eased. Amelia and Jason talked, their voices low and intimate, while Robert sat in an armchair, quietly observing. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just in Amelia, but in Jason as well. The young man had faced his demons and come out stronger for it, and that, Robert knew, was the mark of someone worth trusting. Later, as Robert prepared to leave, Amelia walked him to the door. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." Robert smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me, Amelia. I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Amelia hugged him tightly, and for a moment, Robert felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. His daughter was safe, happy, and surrounded by people who loved her. That was all he had ever wanted. As he stepped out into the cool night air, Robert took a deep breath, feeling a rare sense of peace. The events of the past few days had been chaotic, but they had also brought clarity. He had seen the best and worst of Jason, and in the end, he had chosen to give the young man a chance. Not because he was perfect, but because he was willing to fight for Amelia. And that, Robert thought, was all that mattered. The sun dipped below the New York skyline, casting a warm golden glow over the city. Inside La Belle, the atmosphere was alive with the soft hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the faint melody of a piano playing in the background. At a corner table, Robert Sinclair, Amelia, and Jason sat together, their laughter mingling with the ambient sounds of the restaurant. It was a stark contrast to the tension and secrecy that had defined their first encounter here. Jason raised his glass, his eyes shining with gratitude and determination. "To family," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Robert and Amelia raised their glasses in unison, their smiles mirroring his. "To family," they echoed, the sound of their glasses clinking together, a symbol of unity and newfound trust. For Jason, the past few months had been a whirlwind of change. Robert's mentorship program at Sinclair Enterprises had given him the tools and confidence to build a career he could be proud of. He had thrown himself into the opportunity, working tirelessly to prove that he was more than his past mistakes. And with Amelia by his side, he felt like he could conquer anything. Amelia, too, had grown. She had always been strong and independent, but seeing Jason face his challenges head-on had deepened her respect and love for him. Their relationship, once tested by secrets and fear, had emerged stronger, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual support. Robert watched the two of them, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. He had spent so much of his life shielding Amelia from the world, but now he saw that she didn't need his protection, she needed his trust. And in trusting Jason, he had given her the freedom to build her own life. her own happiness. As the evening wore on, the conversation turned to the future. Jason leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Robert, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. Not just for me, but for Amelia. You've given me a chance to prove myself, and I won't let you down." Robert nodded, his gaze steady. "I know you won't, Jason. You've already proven that you're willing to fight for what matters. That's all I ever wanted for Amelia. Someone who would stand by her no matter what." Amelia smiled, her hand finding Jason's under the table. "And you've done that, Jason. You've shown me that we can face anything together." Robert raised his glass once more, his tone softening. "To the future, may it be filled with love, trust, and endless possibilities." The three of them clinked glasses again, the sound a promise of the life they were building together. For Robert, it was a moment of closure, a realization that his role as a father wasn't to control Amelia's life, but to support her as she navigated it. For Jason, it was a chance to start anew, to leave the shadows of his past behind and embrace the bright future ahead. And for Amelia, it was the assurance that she was surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. As they left the restaurant, the city lights twinkling around them, Robert paused for a moment, looking at Amelia and Jason. "You two have something special," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "Don't ever take it for granted." Amelia hugged him tightly, her voice soft. "We won't, Dad. Thank you for believing in us." Robert smiled, a rare but genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Always." And as they walked into the night, the weight of the past finally lifted. They knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They weren't perfect, but they were a family, and that was enough.